So Best Diplomat UK Day 2. Now this is the core of all the days because that's when you get to participate in the real activities. Everything is shared in a manual. Some months before the conference you are attending, they share materials with you, and then they have at least 2 sessions online on Zoom to discuss what the conference is about, how each day will run, and they tell you what is expected of you on those days. And before we come finally for the conference, you're expected to have prepared a diplomatic stance, a maximum of 2 pages, 600 words, where you would present the position of your country on the topic. The topic for this year's conference in the UK was fair labor practices in global supply chains. And you will prepare a diplomatic stance based on the country you are representing. So for me, I was representing South Sudan. I decided not to represent Cameroon. I looked at South Sudan, which is a young country, and it has its own obstacles as a young country and as an African country. I just wanted to read into its story and know what it has been for South Sudan. The conference also encourages you to take a country other than yours so that you can understand the diplomatic position and the history around other countries apart from yours. When you're presenting diplomatic stances, you're not speaking for yourself as John or Mary. In the conference, you'll be speaking as a diplomat or a delegate of the country you're representing and not the country of which you are a national. It was required that we would do a 1 minute presentation. Delegates who wanted to speak indicated by a show of hands, so it wasn't compulsory. On the manual, it said everybody has to present diplomatic stance. So I was expecting that everybody will present, and which I think is really good because considering that we're coming here to learn, and there are some people, if you don't push them, they would never show up. It would have been ideal to insist that everyone should present their diplomatic stance verbally. So onto the group activities. We had to constitute ourselves into blocks so that we can come up with a resolution that will be focused on the theme of the conference. So the idea here, in order to win, was that you get the highest number of delegates who vote in favor of your resolution. You might have a few countries that are those who propose the resolution, and you might also have several signatories, but for that resolution to be adopted, it has to be voted by a majority. I think we were allowed to form up to 3 or 4 blocks. So what happened was that we Africans, we blacks, we just decided to constitute ourselves into a block. I was happy to have proposed the name for our block, Ubuntu. Ubuntu is of Swahili origin. It means togetherness, oneness. And I was happy my team went with it. So there was that African block, the Ubuntu block. And then there was the Western Bloc. It was made up mainly of Western countries. I don't know, they finally never gave a name to their bloc. And then there was the Caribbean Bloc. When I'm saying the Caribbean Bloc and all of that, it's not necessarily the nationality of those delegates, but the countries that they chose to represent. At some point, the Caribbean Bloc approached us and proposed that we work together so that we would have a majority. Everybody saw reason in us coming together as one bloc, and we constituted the Afro-Caribbean bloc, and gladly we still maintained the name Ubuntu. We became the majority compared to the other bloc. I was very fascinated by this because I saw that likeness, that desire to work together, that desire to come together. I don't know how practically in the diplomatic space within the UN, how these countries, the African countries and the Caribbean countries, how they work together. But this is one thing that at some point my colleague and I in the African bloc, we asked ourselves. The Caribbean bloc seemed to have already started working together a bit in advance compared to us. So by the time we joined them, it felt a bit like we were just at the periphery of negotiations, of the drafting. And my colleague and I were like, are we doing the right thing? So we had to corner the leader, an amazing guy, Antoine, and we had a dialogue. And he said, if there is anything you guys are not satisfied with, please express your worries and we'll sort this out. He took this into consideration and he tried to make it an inclusive group. It's true, every delegate was trying to put himself forward. In the end, it was still a competition. But I seemed to see that the dynamics changed a lot or a bit, and there were more people being involved from the Afro Bloc. One other key thing I must say, which I emphasize, we're not saying the Afro Bloc has decided to join the Caribbean Bloc because it gives them the upper hand. And on the other hand, neither therefore are we saying that the Caribbean Bloc has decided to join the Afro Bloc. We are saying that these two blocs decided to come together. And this was the dynamic for me. Because if you look at the practical world and how power diplomacy plays in international laws language, in diplomatic language, in political language, for me, these were some of the things that were going through my mind. That when we are talking about different sections, different powers coming together, we should maintain that power dynamic for both. If you don't want to lose, then I shouldn't lose. It's true that this is just a play of words, but you'll be surprised at how these little nuances play in negotiations, play in the way that powers are being perceived and the authority that each side has over another. I was glad that this was also considered, and we said that we've come together. By the way things just flowed, I found myself in the position where I had to be the negotiator. Now, because the Afro-Caribbean nations had come together to form a bloc, and mind you also there were it was allowed that different multinationals could be a part of any of these blocs, like Apple, like ICRC. So at some point, it seemed that the number of signatories also mattered. And the other bloc wanted to have signatories from our bloc, but somehow many of them were not willing to give their own signatures to our resolution. So their representative kept trying to play smart one. She was a hard negotiator, but she made a harder one, I would say. So I went to my bloc and I said, I'm moving a motion. And I told them the situation. We need to agree to work as a bloc. First thing, they all accepted. Secondly, we are withdrawing all our signatures and starting afresh. And we are going to work on the basis of two things with the other bloc: transparency and reciprocity. Meaning that they will know how many of their members have given their signatures to us, and we will also know how many and the names. And secondly, the number that we get is the number that they will receive. And when I presented this to the negotiator on the other side, I think she didn't expect this. And she presented me a list. This list had about 17 names, which they said they were given. But guess what? Some of these names were repeated. Luckily, myself and the leader of our group, we noticed these errors and we brought it to their attention. So we kept having the back and forth because I kept on realizing there's a lot of errors here and there, a lot of attempts to trick us. But eventually we fished them out. We reciprocated the number. We submitted the names of signatories and the number. We submitted our resolutions, everything that was expected. And then each team sent representatives to speak. Our team did a fantastic job. After that, there was time for questions and answers. The evaluation was done. The voting began, and the Ubuntu Bloc won. Stand up for the champion, for the champion. Let's be united to build a better tomorrow.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, South Sudan reaffirms its commitment to promoting fair labor practices in global supply chains. Since joining the ILO in 2012, we have worked with partners including the ILO and the UK Foreign Commonwealth Office to strengthen labor governance, engage social practice partners, and advance decent working conditions through comprehensive legal frameworks encompassing ILO regulatory standards. However, persistent domestic conflict continues to impede enforcement, amplifying challenges of GBV, child labor, and unsafe working conditions. South Sudan underscores that sustainable peace is essential for economic transformation. We remain committed to implementing the 2018 revitalized peace agreement and therefore count on continued regional support towards achieving UN SDG 8. I thank you.